So welcome back, everyone. Let me do a quick introduction for the class. Today we're taking another tact at understanding the role of public health in the world. We've talked about community health, so that's sort of a grassroots approach to organizing stakeholders around common problems. We've talked about using data appropriately. We talked about, what was the other one? Trying to remember who else we had. What was it?
LARC.
Oh, LARC, yeah. So a very specific medical issue, teen pregnancy. How do you address that? Using a one-time long-lasting approach with LARC, long-acting reversible contraception. That's great. So today we're talking about legal advocacy. And you probably remember from the prep question that this goes right to changing the context on the Freedom Triangle. Because through laws and policies, regulations, you establish what's possible. And you establish what's not possible for populations, right? So you can tell people, stop smoking, stop smoking, stop smoking all you want. But that won't get you as far as, for example, banning cigarettes in restaurants and bars, banning it in parks, increasing the price through taxation, making it simply not feasible for people to smoke, even though the tendency may be to want to. So Justin Wood is visiting us today from New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. They are a legal advocacy organization. They have areas of specialty, including environmental health. And Justin today is going to be talking about some of the work they do in NYLPI, as we call them, NYLPI, here in New York City to address disparities in health and justice. So I'll let you take it away from here, Justin. Thanks for joining us.
Great, thanks so much, Dr. Collins, and hi, good evening, everyone. Glad I like this virtual. I can see the real classroom, and then I see this virtual classroom, which is kind of fun and a new thing for me on Zoom. We're trying like 20 months into this situation. And I would love to make this, since I'm sure we all have a little bit of Zoom fatigue after so many months, as interactive and informal as possible. So I'd be happy to talk a little bit about New York Lawyers for the Public Interest and what we do and what I do. And then as we go, I would love to fill as much of the 45 minutes or 40 minutes that we have together with your questions and comments, and we can take it in a number of directions. So just by way of background, my name is Justin Wood. My title is I'm the Director of Policy. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm sort of an organizer by training, and we can talk about that a little bit. And I'm the Director of Policy for New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. NYLPI, as we call it, has been around for more than 40 years. We're a civil rights focused legal organization, so a nonprofit legal organization. And the history was the private bar or the private attorneys in the city. This was sort of in the context 40 plus years ago. So the political context of the late 60s and early 70s, lawyers in New York City wanted to contribute more to the struggles for civil rights in our city and in our country. And so formed this nonprofit organization that would, a major role over the years has been to connect law firms with clients and organizations that need legal advice who are engaged in the very real disparities in public health is a big one in our city. So NYLPI's grown a little over the years, and now we're sort of a staff of probably 30 people or so. And we have 4 different program areas. One, and they're all about addressing the disparities, racial disparities in justice and injustices, I should say, in our city and state. One is a health justice program, which is very focused on health care itself. A lot of it is about access to care, preventative care, and I can give some examples from that program. Another is environmental justice, which is an area I've spent many years working in at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. So that's sort of still a lot of the work I do. And then the third is disability justice, which tries to address the major disparities and discrimination that people with disabilities, that very diverse and large population of people who identify as having disabilities, face in our city. And then the fourth program is called the Pro Bono Clearinghouse. And I hope no matter what areas in public health you all go into, you'll take advantage of this at some point in your career. That is a program that connects law firms who want to do volunteer pro bono, so to speak, work with clients and organizations that need legal representation, basically. So those are kind of the four focus areas we have. I would say that the guiding philosophy that makes us different from a lot of legal organizations and law firms is that we try to practice a philosophy called community lawyering, meaning that we're guided by what the disadvantaged and marginalized communities that we seek to advocate for and with, the word with is more appropriate here, to really take what those communities and clients need and what their proposed solutions to problems are, rather than being the sort of legal organization that maybe comes up with like, okay, here's an interesting case we could run at the Supreme Court. Let's go find a client who fits this bill to try to do something interesting legally. We try, and I think try is an operative word, because this is something that lawyers and those of us who work with lawyers and I think professionals generally need to work on. We try to center, okay, what are clients who are actually impacted by inequality in New York City coming to us with as problems, and what are their suggested solutions? And then how can we harness the legal expertise of our lawyers who are on our staff? How can we harness the organizing experience of our organizers who we have on staff? That's a very important component of our organization, is that we have community organizers actually working on teams alongside the attorneys. And then finally, other staff, like we have a number of social workers on staff who are experienced advocates, advocating for clients in areas as diverse as special education, or access to healthcare for immigrant populations who are often excluded from health insurance and sort of the health system generally. So that's a little bit of our guiding philosophy and mission. And then, I can tell you a little bit about my sort of professional background and journey to this role. And then I'd love to give you some examples and maybe have some discussion of what some of the most pressing issues and campaigns facing our city and state are today. So I'm actually an organizer by background. I sort of got involved with different advocacy and organizing campaigns when I was an undergraduate in college, sort of in my personal activism, and decided after undergrad that I wanted to try to learn to be a union organizer, or the labor movement, to advocate for better conditions for themselves and those who they serve. And I ended up getting a job actually in a healthcare union called the Committee of Interns and Residents, SEIU, which is part of a large healthcare union and actually represents and advocates and fights for medical residents in our healthcare system. So I learned, a lot over 10 to 13 years, being both an organizer and researcher, going out and talking to healthcare professionals about the problems they faced and working with them to organize collectively, in this case, in a sort of in the format of a labor union, to fight for better conditions for themselves. And a big part of that was also centering that when healthcare professionals are well taken care of and have a voice in their institutions, that it also benefits the patients. And in so many of our New York City hospitals, that means patients coming from communities that often have very little voice in the healthcare system, and maybe very little access to healthcare. So I was an organizer for many years before coming to this NILPI, this legal organization. And now I do, most of my work is on policy, which is a very broad area. A lot of what I work on these days is legislation, trying to pass legislation, both at the local level, so in our city council and with our mayor, at the state level, and a little bit at the federal level, although we're, again, grounded very much in what local communities want and need. So that doesn't always translate directly into like really big federal legislation. So a lot of what I do today, you could almost call it, you can in fact call it lobbying, which is meeting with elected officials. A lot of that is on Zoom, although a little bit more in person as we learn to live with the virus. A lot of bringing our partners and clients to meet with elected officials, and a lot of research and writing to sort of develop and justify the legislation that we're trying to pass at every level of government. And for me, I try to go back and really connect what I do now to my background as a labor organizer and community organizer, because I think it's very hard to pass, and as an advocacy organization, a sort of nonprofit organization, I think it's very hard to pass legislation just by saying, oh, this is a good idea to lawmakers. It's really important to keep that background in organizing. And I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of what a definition, working definition of organizing is. I think one definition I've seen that sums it up is sort of teaching people and working with people to develop their own power. And so in the case of what I do today, it's really trying to make sure that people who are actually going to be impacted by decisions that our government makes are at the table and helping to develop and promote, whether it's a law that we want passed, or a law in many cases that we want enforced, or for that matter, I'm not in court arguing because I'm not an attorney, but if we're going to court as an organization, making sure that people who are impacted are exerting their power, organizing around a court case, and making sure that the judges hearing the case are also seeing how it will benefit people and why it's important. And so in terms of what I do on a day-to-day basis, it's really a diverse, one of the things I love about this work is how diverse the day is and how many different skills we draw on, and how many different people we get to talk to who bring expertise and knowledge and perspective to the campaigns that we're often running, often over the course of years, to address a specific inequality. And that includes public health professionals. I mean, I want to make sure we center this on what you all are learning and preparing to do, because I think, COVID-19 has made this even more so, but justifying what we're fighting for with data and facts and statistics is a really important part of addressing these things. And I'll give some specific examples, but I think a lot of what we're trying to do when we're running these campaigns is take what experts like public health professionals have to say, take what people who are most impacted by a government decision have to say, and really develop the two into clear, concise communications that lawmakers are going to hear. Most importantly, that voters and community members are going to be able to understand and engage with, because at the end of the day, you know, what I do is policy campaigns. What the elected officials pay attention to really is not how good are the arguments coming from a public health professional or a lawyer. What they're paying attention to really is how many voters are actually being mobilized around this issue, and do I as an elected official need to pay attention to this if I want the people in my community who elected me to be happy with me. So that's such an important part of organizing. I think around this is power and government are that people are realizing the power they have, and that people in government are hearing from the people who actually vote for them and live in their communities. So that's very broad. Why don't I pause here for any questions, and then I'd love to give you some examples of what we're working on right now.
Has anyone been involved in any legal advocacy? It could be something fairly simple or something pretty
involved. How about
involved.
organizing?
Yeah, organizing. I can't see all the faces. But...
Anyone? And sorry, my computer is having a few issues. So if you just speak up and I'll hear you if you want to chime in, or use the raise hand function. So has anyone been involved in any activism or organizing? It doesn't have to be something you thought of as organizing, to win something in your community, on your campus, anything like that?
To make a change that needed to happen?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me clearly?
Yeah, you're good.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, my name's Gavino. I'm in Michigan right now, and I'm a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they're a nationwide climate lobbying group that advocates for a lot of issues that are related to climate change. So I've had a couple instances and some experiencing lobbying. I know that I've met with Debbie Stabenow, who, if I remember correctly, is the senator or representative of Michigan, kind of talking about a lot of issues that are going on, from climate change to erosion, just like a large variety of issues that are kind of specifically related to climate change. So just kind of like you said, so many Zoom meetings, a lot of talking, a lot of bipartisan discussion as well, trying to find ways to make things work, and then, you know, trying to heed on someone's or kind of going off of someone saying, oh yeah, we're definitely going to try our very best to follow up with you and do the things that we can to achieve the goal that you're doing, the reason why you're lobbying. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't at all.
That's a great example. And I mean, climate change and climate justice legislation is one of the biggest things that we're working on now in New York State, also at the federal level, and something that I'm going to be spending a lot of my time on in the coming fall and winter, as our New York State legislature starts to convene in Albany and we have a new governor. I'm curious, when you were meeting with legislators like that, was there anything in particular that you found that they paid attention to or seemed to respond to in terms of how you organized it?
So a lot of it was just kind of trying to do as much direct communication as we can. So we were really advocating for the Green New Deal. That was a big thing that we were trying to push for a really long time. And there would be some circumstances when we'd mention that, and they would be really, really interested. But then we would more likely than not have a representative of someone kind of go on their behalf to discuss with us. So it would be kind of a situation where you would probably have like 2 or 3 meetings with them, and then inevitably you would probably speak to the person that you were trying to talk to primarily. So I mean, that's one specific instance that I could think of. Yeah.
Great. Anyone else? Anything where you were pushing for a change, trying to make a change in your community or life?
I interned at a state senator's district office. So I was kind of hearing from constituents, so kind of like from the other side. So I wasn't doing the advocacy myself, but hearing it and relaying it to the senator. So it was definitely some insight into the frustrations of when you have to talk to a representative and not the actual elected official, but also the power of, like you said, the voters. Because really, like, once you hear something enough times, it's like, oh, all right, let's look into this. So that's my 2 cents.
That's great. To have someone that we can test our campaign messaging on, who's actually been on the receiving end of so many constituent meetings. That's very interesting. And I think that's one thing that I'm really always working on is to make sure that constituents are involved. There's no reason a city council member from Queens is they might listen to us, but they're not going to do something just because lawyers from Manhattan said it was a good idea. So we're always trying to make sure we're bringing constituents and organizing constituents who actually live in someone's district. Great. Anyone else want to chime in with an experience or relevant background before we move on?
We have someone in the room here live. Please go ahead.
So professionally, I've done some work around NYPD reforms. So specifically working to eliminate the police as first responders when someone is experiencing a mental health crisis in public.
Oh, right.
And NILP is actually one of the partner organizations that we've worked with. But yeah, so that's a multi-year campaign. We finally got a pilot launched in Harlem to test this model, but it's ongoing. So yeah.
Great example.
That's amazing, and I'm so glad to hear. I'm not sure I can see or identify who's speaking. Okay, hello. That's such a powerful campaign, and I actually am not personally working on that, so I'm sorry we haven't met. And I know you would know a lot more about the specifics, but that's a great example of one of our New York Lawyers for the Public Interest coalitions that we're involved in. And I want to highlight that a lot of the most powerful, I think powerful, because these are the things that succeed, work that we do is in a broad and diverse coalition of impacted organizations that bring all of the sort of intersectional ways in which an issue affects people. And that's a really important one. I mean, I don't have the stats. You may have the stats. I mean, people with experiencing mental health crisis are just incredibly disproportionately, and people of color specifically experiencing mental health crisis are very disproportionately likely to be harmed by police. And I don't claim expertise on this campaign, but it's an important one. So the city has a pilot program to have trained mental health responders. And this is an area where we're trying to shift things away from the model of policing we have into a public health model. And we're working to get those responses funded and laws mandating that at a much bigger scale. So I don't claim expertise on that one, but it's a really important campaign that brings sort of our disability justice and health justice focus to an issue where there's just huge disparities in how people are treated by the police, depending on race and depending on sort of the police perceived mental health status.
This is so similar to a thing in the news where a Black man was arrested and he had mental health problems and they misjudged him. That kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of horrible examples of this happening, and they keep happening in New York City and elsewhere.
It happened in upstate.
Oh, that was upstate. Okay. And I know, for example, individuals who are deaf are frequently subjected to violence by police because, police respond as if you're quote unquote disobeying when someone may not be able to hear or understand. So forms of bringing language access, whether that's American Sign Language or any other language, to policing and mental health response is another very important component of that. And I would just say another aspect of what we try to do, and again, I don't know the specifics on this campaign very well, but I know that we're always searching for okay, what's a model that another city or country or state has done that works well? I think it's really important in this work that we're bringing solutions that are proven, have some evidence base behind them. And I know that in the case of mental health crisis response, that Eugene, Oregon, not our nation's, not a top 10 city, but an important city, had a model of innovative response to mental health situations where non-police health professionals were responding. And so I know that we did a lot of outreach to folks in Eugene, Oregon, and connected them with legislators here so that New York City could learn from that model. And then the beauty of that is if New York City is able to successfully adopt something, we're huge. I mean, we're the biggest police force in the country, the biggest school system in the country, the biggest environmental footprint with our energy and our transportation. And so in any of these policy campaigns, if we can make something work in New York City, it's like you can take it on the road and make it work anywhere in some ways, because this is, it's the saying, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So New York City is an incredibly important testing ground for things. I'll give you all another example, because this is something that's very live happening this week. In our New York City public schools, this is an issue of both environmental justice and disability justice, which is one reason I love this campaign, because it's about bringing different impacted groups and voices together. We have a fleet of about 10,000 school buses. I mean, it's huge, that burn diesel and gasoline fuel. And if you live anywhere near New York City, you see these. They're lined up every morning outside of every public school, often idling engines. The buses are stored in large bus depots and parking lots that are mostly in outer borough communities, communities of color and low-income communities that have all of the other pollution sources. So what we call environmental justice communities. And the students who ride school buses for the longest distances and time every day in New York City are mostly students with disabilities who are in special education programs and have to often travel a long distance to get the sort of customized education program they need. And so one thing we've been working on for years with a coalition is getting a mandate in New York City that we're going to start phasing out these diesel and gas buses, which are a huge source of pollution. And if you're a student riding this thing for up to 3 hours a day, you're breathing a lot of particulate matter and other pollutants from a diesel bus. The drivers and staff working on these buses are exposed for many, many hours a day. And we've heard from the drivers that when they're in the garages in the morning, warming the buses up, I mean, the fumes are just, one driver told me last week, we were wearing masks long before COVID because the pollution where we work is so intolerable. And so we've had a campaign of like, we need to phase out these diesel buses and replace them with electric vehicles, which can be charged with renewable energy if we also take care of generating enough renewable energy in New York City and near the city, and don't have any emissions. They're also quieter. I mean, noise pollution is another issue we could talk about. And so finally, this is one of these issues where for years we've been pushing for this and it was just stalled in the city council. And finally, this council this week is supposed to pass a mandate that by 2035, so 13 years from now, it's not going to happen very fast, all New York City school buses will be fully electric. And that's awesome. And we're hopeful, like knock on wood. If you are interested in this, please call your local council member if you live in New York City and tell them to vote yes on Thursday for intro 455. That's the number of the bill. But it's one of these issues where I think one of the things that New York Lawyers was doing is trying to make sure this coalition brought together everyone impacted by the issue. So environmental justice communities and organizations from the communities that have the most of these buses, the drivers in the form of their union, and the students. Like, this is a big issue for students in special education programs, but parents fighting for special education services for their children often have so many problems. I mean, getting a special education program, dealing with all of your needs being met by the public education system is a huge battle for many parents. So we've been making sure that we're reaching out constantly to the groups that advocate on that. On any given day, a diesel bus may not be their biggest issue, but it's a background issue that, again, is a cumulative public health issue, because over the years, students and drivers and people who live near bus depots and schools are breathing a lot of these fumes. So that's a very current example of a bill that we're working on right now this week. And I saw in the chat, someone said you had heard about this. Any questions or feedback on that one?
Justin, is it true that you can report idling vehicles for a monetary reward?
It is absolutely true, and that's a really cool initiative. I actually haven't done it yet, but here's an example of where all of us as New Yorkers, or if you're in Michigan or anywhere, this is another example where let's try to replicate these policies wherever we can. Replicability is a very important part of this. So New York did pass a law a few years ago that anyone can report an idling truck or bus, like a diesel engine, and if you film it with your phone or whatever, for breaking the law, which means idling for more than 1 minute, I believe, outside of a school, or 3 minutes anywhere else, you can report the violation to the Department of Environmental Protection or 311, submit your video, and then you get paid a part of the fines. So there's like an incentive for all of us to help enforce
free money for reporting idolization.
Yep. I highly encourage everyone to take that up as a side gig. I've heard of some people making thousands of dollars a year on this. And that actually reminds me, we worked on a number of these issues. I think, the other really important part of this is sort of what is often called citizen science. And I don't know if you've talked about this in the course yet, but it's, again, empowering people. I mean, we talk about the power of organizing. It's also the power of data collected by everyday people. So 2 examples. With the bus campaign, we had volunteers and students and one of our amazing interns go out I think it was 2 years ago in the spring, the year before COVID, whatever that was. And just monitor that, like just walk around public schools and count the number of buses that were idling. And it was like a staggering percentage. It was like 95% of the buses. And this was on, we made sure that it was on like a nice temperate June day. So the sort of like, oh, it's freezing cold and the drivers have to idle to heat up the bus, or oh, it's boiling hot and they have to have the AC on. Those excuses didn't apply. And it was just a huge percentage that were idling. And that data, we actually don't know much because this is an active investigation, but that data actually ultimately found its way to the Attorney General's office of New York State. And we have reason to believe that they've been conducting their own investigation and maybe seeking a settlement with the bus companies that don't do enough to provide for their drivers and staying, you know, comfortably warm or cool, and certainly don't do enough to invest in electric buses and prevent idling of diesel buses. So a little bit of citizen science. Another aspect of that is we've used air monitoring and we've talked to Dr. Collins' team, and we may want to do more of this, but getting students or drivers or just people living in communities near pollution sources to carry like a backpack, a small air monitor around and collect records of how much PM 2.5, how much nitrogen oxide, how many other pollution forms of pollution are people being exposed to from these things. So an example of a campaign, and I love the idea of everyone, you know, I encourage you all to really think about those aspects when you're doing research in public health is how do you empower and get really great data sources by empowering people to collect data with you. Dr. Collins, how much do we have, like 5 minutes left, or?
Let's see. Yeah, roughly 5 minutes.
Any other questions or feedback at this point? I mean, those are two great examples of campaigns that New York Lawyers for the Public Interest is involved in.
Are you involved with what's commonly called Stop the Stuff? That's the that would apply to restaurants.
I don't have a lot of expertise on that, but I know we connected folks at Mount Sinai with some of the people fighting for that bill, and it's one of many bills that we support because this is on now the sort of waste management side of our environmental justice program. And we've done a lot on trying to reduce the amount of waste in New York City that's generated by our businesses.
So before you describe it, let me just ask the audience. Raise your hand if you've ever ordered delivery from anywhere. So I assume everyone has done it at some point. Raise your hand if you've ever needed the plastic silverware that they provided for you. Have you ever needed something? Maybe you have. Has anyone ever needed the extra plastic silverware? Like you were in a place that had no silverware in the home. So you need, oh, thank goodness they gave us this packaged knife, fork, and spoon and a napkin. Phew, now I can eat my food. So with that in mind, maybe you can describe, do you know how to describe what the bill is actually proposing, Justin?
I believe this bill would make it the default that restaurants can't give you all this extra stuff by default, and you have to specifically request it.
And why would that be important for waste management?
Or it might be biodegradable or something.
Now, even that is pretty wasteful, though, unfortunately. But,
I tried.
just, yeah, good try.
I think it would be important because it allows for people not to have to, you know, get all this extra stuff. As you're saying, most people end up throwing it away and not recycling it. So if we don't need it, just don't use, you know, just don't send it.
It's an example of changing the context.
Exactly. And Justin, to give us some context, maybe you could connect that to what you know, our bigger picture waste management strategies are these days.
Well, one context I would love to give that is, does anyone waste that we generate, whether it's those plastics that we don't often need? I mean, I'm the same as everyone else. I think I can count the number of times I really needed the knife and fork and napkin like on one hand. Does anyone know where all this garbage goes in New York City? I mean, it gets picked up by a big truck. Again, diesel, should be electric. We're working on that. But where does it go?
I'm assuming some dump somewhere.
Exactly, somewhere.
Exactly. It often within our city, we don't even have any landfills here anymore. So it doesn't go locally. It ends up in landfills, most of it, that are pretty far away. And that's a lot of trucking, diesel truck miles, to get it all the way to upstate New York, as far as South Carolina. And then locally, the trucks dump it in a local called a transfer station. And these are basically just big warehouses with giant mountains of garbage that gets loaded with a front end loader from one truck to another bigger truck to go upstate or South Carolina or Ohio. And one thing I want to point out, I mean, an important aspect of what we're fighting for with our waste management system or our school bus system or our power plants, all of it, is the huge disparities in who suffers the most harm from these things. So if you look at a map of waste transfer stations, guess what that map looks like? I mean, spoiler, it looks like low-income communities, mostly communities of color in the outer boroughs that have clusters of these things, and therefore hundreds of garbage trucks descending on these communities every day to dump garbage. They often smell, these things smell terrible. We're actually fighting one of them that wants to expand in Southeast Queens, Jamaica, Queens. We filed a lawsuit on behalf of local residents that want to fight this expansion because it means more garbage, more trucks, more pollution, and more terrible odor in their community. But I think the parallel I want to make sure we walk away with is the map of where the school bus depots are looks shockingly similar to the map of where the waste transfer stations are. And it also looks shockingly similar to the map of where like power plants that are burning fossil fuels are. And so it's like, it's a map of environmental injustice. I love these policies like Stop This Stuff because they mean less flow of waste going to the most disadvantaged communities that have to bear the brunt of this stuff. But it also benefits everyone. Less garbage trucks for any community. I mean, the Upper East Side is a wealthier neighborhood near where Mount Sinai is, but there's still a lot of truck traffic there. In fact, we did a citizen science thing with some students a few years ago where we counted the trucks, and there's a lot of pollution. So we like these, we love these policies that bring together communities that may not have even talked before, but that want to fight for the same solutions. But I think one important criteria is for us, whether it's a climate change bill or a waste management bill, is that we're really trying to right the historical injustice of a few communities who often
So basically being the voice of the voiceless.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that, except that we want to actually not just serve as a voice for people, but bring those people to the table to help write the law, to the legislative meetings, to the lobbying meetings. But absolutely, it's addressing the historical injustice of a few communities having to bear the brunt of all this stuff. I bet if we looked at a map of police violence, I haven't looked at that map, but I'm just taking a guess that it would also look similar. Great. Well, I would just leave you with one other exciting campaign. I love the Stop the Stuff bill. Back to the environmental justice and what we call climate justice world, I would just let you know that one giant New York State campaign that we're going to be spending a lot of time on this winter is called the New York Renews, and I'll put the website in the chat. Definitely check this out on social media as well. If you're on Twitter or Facebook, if Facebook works, LOL. Yes, okay, that is the website. this winter is going to be one of the most critical climate sort of legislative sessions for addressing the urgency of climate change, but again, climate justice, meaning addressing not only climate change on the whole, but all of the historical injustices in which communities have borne the brunt of climate change, whether it's overheat, like heat islands in New York City, like communities that get way too hot because they don't have the same amount of trees or air conditioning. Flooding, obviously, Ida was horrendous, and we saw enormous injustices in some communities, like people literally dying in their basements, and where the flooding is. And so this is going to be
illegally made basement apartments that can be part of
I mean, absolutely. And access to housing is such a, like safe housing is such a critical part of this too. So there are many, many threads to climate injustice and many, many things we need to tackle at once at every level of government to solve the problem and you know, both to mitigate what's coming and also to try to actually solve the root cause of the problem, which is burning fossil fuels. But I would really encourage everyone to check out this campaign because it's going to be very active, and we're going to be doing a huge rally in Manhattan on November 13th. And I'm happy to pass info on that along if that's something that's of interest to the class. And we're going to be really actively pushing the New York State governor and legislature to take action this year. Because last year, honestly, they didn't address climate justice really at all. And they had a whole year of one party governing with a big majority.
And Justin, that's a great way to sort of wrap things up in terms of activism opportunities for the students. If they want to get involved, is it as simple as going to the NILPI website and seeing what the active campaigns are? How can they volunteer? How can they get involved locally? What do you suggest?
I'm going to put my email in.
That's a great start.
And yes, we often are posting these things on our social media. That's a very important part of our organizing these days. It always was, but COVID and working remotely and doing less in person made it even more so. But if you follow us on Twitter, for example, we are very actively putting these things out, including ways to easily participate and lobby your legislators. And we really need public health voices, I would say, in these battles. Everything from police brutality to climate justice. Your voices are very important in this.
Any final questions for Mr. Wood?
I have a question.
We have a question. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Justin. What is one thing that you would like to see NILPI tackle in the near future? Like maybe one thing they haven't touched upon yet or haven't touched upon enough? What are your thoughts?
That's a great question. I mean, I would say it's, you know, honestly, it's whatever people bring to us. I mean, I love this job because I'm working on so many things that are very personally meaningful to me, as well as to the organization. I'll say that I would like to see New York City take the need for renewable energy as, I mean, we're so far from it and it's so urgent. And I would like us to see us thinking really creatively about ways to both impact the climate footprint, but also create jobs in the communities that have, again, borne the brunt of pollution, borne the brunt of unemployment. And so really creative things that, whether it's waste management or affordable housing, all of the things that folks spoke about, that New York City is thinking really creatively about doing it and honestly doing it fast. Things typically take way too long. I mean, this school bus thing took years just to get the mandate passed, let alone implemented. And so I would like to see us all thinking fast.
Is there a viable plan for Rikers becoming a wind farm, solar farm?
That's exactly one of the examples I had in that we've been promoting, is like there's been a series of bills in the city called Renewable Rikers, and there's a campaign called Renewable Rikers, like look that one up too, which is the idea of shutting down the horrible prison and instead creating a hub of renewable energy and open public space, and making sure that jobs that would be created from those initiatives, whether it's a solar farm or giant compost operation for organic waste, that those jobs, pipeline, like training and pipelines for those jobs are going to the same communities where there's been so much unemployment and where folks all too often have ended up in places like Rikers.
Amazing. Let's end on that optimistic note and hope for good things in the future. And we'll say thank you very much to Justin for joining us today. It's great to hear about all of the work that NILPI is involved with.
Pleasure to meet you all, and I hope our paths cross again soon at a rally or a meeting or all of the above.
Great, thanks so much.
All right, take care, everyone. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.